Today I'm going to walk you through a mini API discovery simulation demo. I'm going to share my screen shortly whilst we walk through that. And then we are going to create a simple API inventory out of our discovery. So I have an Ubuntu VM here, and there are APIs that are running on this VM. And what we are going to be doing is to do a traffic tapping. So I have some scripts that I have actually developed, and these scripts are actually in a file path which is traffic tapping. As I said, we are happy to share some of these resources, these lab simulations with you. If you are interested in, you can actually make a request for it in the, in the link in the description. And then also we have what we call the monitoring traffic. So I have two tabs open here. One is just to mimic API requests that are ongoing within our environment, which this is our Ubuntu VM. And this is to just listen on that traffic and then look at API requests that are coming in and check in our CMDB, or let's say in our API inventory that we have, and find which of these APIs do we already have and which of them don't we have. And the ones that we don't have in our inventory, we mark them as shadow APIs, and then we can further get a report on them and investigate that report or analyze it further. So in here, I'm going to generate a traffic, um, and then here I'm going to listen on that traffic to see basically what is happening in there. And then you can see, so this is basically more of like a banking API or a bank environment or a banking system that has APIs being used. So let's say bank statement API, currency API, and all that, or customer information APIs and stuff. So now we can see that these APIs and their respective endpoints, we are actually generating more or mimicking a scenario where users are making requests to these APIs, and in this tab, we are listening on those requests, and we are checking all the endpoints that are being triggered to find out which of these endpoints do we have documented in our inventory. Now in the first one that we can see here in this first line, you can see that we have an offer API. So probably maybe the bank has some kind of product offers that they have or promo offers that they offer. We have an API that handles that. And then you can see that this API uses a get method. We see the endpoints here, but this API is not documented, so we mark it as a shadow API. The next one here is documented, which has an audit and entries endpoint. These ones are documented, which means that we already have them in our inventory list. We also get to see another one here, which is customer API, has an endpoint of internal / export. This we don't have in our CMD, or let's say in our inventory. So this is also marked as shadow API. So we get to see these APIs, their endpoints, which ones are documented, which ones are not documented, and we keep listening on that traffic request. Now you see over here, all these are mimicked simulations that actually gives us a sense of, okay, customers are using this endpoint, or users are actually consuming this endpoint, or these endpoints or these APIs are live and active. And then we begin to listen in and see which of them do we have in our CMDB or in our inventory, and which of them don't we have. Now, as I said, there are a lot of open source tools and vendor products on platforms that you can actually integrate within your environment. And at RiverSafe, we actually bring in that support to select which tool works best for you, which tool actually works within your ecosystem and your kind of API security maturity level that you are at the moment. So in this sense, we are just monitoring, we are just listening in. Now, one of the things I would do is that I'm going to stop the monitoring, and then that will generate a report for us. And we will take a close look at the report once this is actually done. So this is the traffic report CSV file that was generated after our simulation has completed, which is the traffic monitoring. So you can see here we have traffic reports here, and we see the host the API host, and then we get to see documented count. So for instance, on this particular API host, how many API endpoints or how many endpoints or path do we have on this particular host that are documented? And how many paths do we have on this particular host that are shadow count or that are, let's say, undocumented? So we have one shadow API here on this particular host. We have zero documented, which means on this particular host, there are no documented API endpoints. We get to see what shadow path it identified. Our simulation script identified a path called v1 forward slash report. It also identified that this particular API endpoint belongs to a team within the organization called a tax team. So we can actually trace back to find out which team actually maintains this particular API endpoint. And then we look at if that particular API endpoint also emits any PII, that is personal identifiable information. And we get to see no. So our simulation analyze those APIs, analyze the requests that are coming in, and then map them to some metrics to identify if it is actually providing certain response or consuming any personal identifiable information. These are quite sensitive things that we need to be, mindful of or have visibility of. We get to see when last probably a change was made to that particular API. We try to also find out is it an internal consumer or an external. So in this case, we said this is a shadow API, but it's an external API which it is being consumed by customers and not internal teams, which is quite an interesting discovery here. And then we also get to see what version of this or of the API, what is the version of it, right? So this is actually a version one, a V1. When first was it seen in the environment, or when first was it deployed, which is we have the timestamp there, and when last it was seen, we see the timestamp there as well. Let's pick another random one. We have oh, great. So we have, let me see here, we have another API host. So we have a host here. This time it found two endpoints that are documented, and we see those endpoints here. We have one that is a UUID endpoint, and we have one that is VI treasury forward slash cash. Remember, this is a simulation of a banking API. So, these names are quite familiar within a financial environment. We get to see is there any shadow path? No shadow path. All of them are documented. We get to see the team that owns that. In this case, there are no PIs that are actually emitted or any PI response captured from this particular path. We get to see the exposure and all that. Let's take one more. So, for instance, let's take a look at this one here. So no, or let's look at this one here. So here we have let's see, a customer API, bankdemo.com. So this is basically the host. We get to see that this particular API is quite interesting. It has one documented path. You can see that documented count is one. It also has one shadow path. So for the documented path, it's called status forward slash 200. And then the undocumented path is internal forward slash export. We get to see the team that owns this particular API, or manages it, or develops it. We also realize that it doesn't emit any PII as well. We get to see when last an update was made to this. And we get to also understand that this is actually a customer facing API, which the customers are consuming it and not internal teams as well. We get to see the methods as well, which is a get method as well. Now, in our next episode, we are going to look at what next. Now I know my shadow APIs. I've discovered my shadow APIs. I know them. What next? What do I do with them? Right. So we want to look at what is the next point of action. How do we actually look at risk metrics in place? how do we prioritize which ones should we focus on resolving, or which ones are of top priority, which API path, which are shadow APIs are top priorities? Do we decommission them or do we leave them there? So we will look at that in our next episode. I hope you found that useful and learned something new today about shadow APIs. See you in the next episode. Until then, keep discovering and keep that inventory up to date.